The Long Road by Wolfland.
Go, Salamence!
The ball barely left Drake's hand before it exploded open, and the bright red wings of the champion's most powerful Pokémon sliced through the sky. Metagross's gaze slid up to regard the fearsome dragon, who circled overhead only once before turning a glare downward, affixed to its opponent. But Metagross would not be intimidated, and instead it returned the stare, eyes alight with psychic energy. It only took Salamence a brief second to realize its intimidation tactic had been foiled, and with a mighty roar, it pumped its wings and shot forward with enough speed to break Metagross's psychic hold. Letting out a disgruntled rumble, Metagross shuffled to follow Salamence's trajectory, and as the dragon wheeled in the sky, a movement from the champion's box caught its eye. Drake's hand swung down in time with his shout,
Draco Meteor!
Obeying with a roar, Salamence circled high, opening its jaws as a mass of orange energy began to build. The ground shook, and dark clouds began to gather overhead, trembling under the massive power of the ultimate dragon-type move. But Metagross remained impassive, bolstered by Steven's confident stare. They both could sense it, their minds unconsciously linked by the thread of Metagross's psychic typing. If Drake was so desperate to end the match that he'd go all out at the start, if they could weather this storm, they'd have their chance to mount a counterattack. With one last glance back at the grounded steel type, Salamence threw its head back and unleashed the maelstrom of its attack. Defend, Metagross! As the meteors rained down, covering the battlefield in smoldering craters, Metagross hunkered at the center of the attack, waiting, withstanding, until the largest concentration of meteors headed right for it. Eyes sharp, it roared, unleashing a pulse of psychic energy that rocketed outward in a spherical shield. The force field wavered and flickered as the meteor struck, but it held for the duration of Salamence's attack. And as the last meteor fell, Metagross blinked and the psychic shield dropped, only to let out a roar of pain as Salamence's jaws clamped down on its rear leg, fangs glowing with dark energy. The dragon had swooped low under the coverage of its meteor shower and delivered a stealthy crunch attack that left Metagross staggered. Howling, Metagross spun, trying to catch Salamence's head with a solid punch. But Salamence was crafty, and it dodged to the side, releasing Metagross's leg while raking a dragon claw across the steel type's flank as it retreated back to the safety of midair. Steven gritted his teeth when Metagross let out a groan as it gathered itself, reeling from Salamence's physical assault. But it was still standing, and that meant the battle wasn't over yet. Our turn, Metagross! Steven shouted, and the rush of his starter's emphatic agreement surged through his mind. Turning its gaze skyward, the outline of a faint psychic aura traced around Salamence's form, but it didn't slow its flight. Still focused on the dragon above, Metagross gave a low rumble and hunkered low on all four legs. A clattering and clacking of stone could be heard as the hum of Metagross's magnetic field grew in a crescendo until Steven could feel the reverberations in his limbs. Suddenly, with a mighty push, his partner rocketed from the ground in a straight vertical ascent. Two red eyes leveled with Salamence's own, glowing bright with psychic energy, and the dragon shuddered to a surprise stop mid-flight, right in front of Metagross's nose. Wide-eyed, it let out a confused roar as Metagross hooked two legs over the dragon's back and pinned its wings to its side. A dragon without wings wasn't going to fly very far, and Salamence tumbled from the sky, dragged down by the anchor of Metagross's full weight. The two Pokémon plummeted toward the earth, spinning as they fell. But as the ground loomed near, a pulse of Metagross's magnetism spun it on top of its foe, and with all four legs, it threw Salamence straight to the ground in an explosion of tile and rock. Landing with a cushioned thud just at the edge of the impact crater, Metagross waited for the dust to clear, but its wait didn't last long, as a roaring flamethrower shot from the dust straight for its face. Except Metagross had been watching warily, and it deftly deflected the attack away with its psychic manipulation. But then Salamence was upon it before the flames dissipated, Dragon Claw slashing through the air. Dust and dirt swirled as the two Pokémon clashed, Metagross's fist glowing bright as it parried Salamence's slashes. Steven watched the exchange, expression tight. He tried to keep track of who was landing more blows, but the flash of bullet punches and crunch attacks were flying too fast for him to keep up. Roars and grunts and howls filled the air as Metagross danced as nimbly as it could, following the snaking movements of the incensed Salamence. Teeth and claws gleamed bright under the arena lights, leaving gouges and denting scales in their wake, until both Pokémon landed simultaneous blows. A Dragon Claw from overhead drove Metagross headfirst into the dirt, just as its own fist connected with Salamence's jaw in a right hook that sent the dragon spiraling. Steven leaned forward in his box, and from the corner of his eye, he was surprised to see Drake do the same. Both Pokémon had fallen some distance from the other, and neither one looked to hold an advantage in terms of stamina. Metagross groaned as it pried its face from where it had shattered the arena floor, and Salamence staggered momentarily as it regained its footing, shaking its head. From the way both Pokémon wavered where they stood, Steven knew Drake had come to the same conclusion as him. This battle was not going to go on much longer.
Metagross! Salamence!
Both trainers broke the stalemate simultaneously.
Finish this!
Salamence's roar was deafening as its jaws opened wide, the light of a flamethrower growing hot in its throat. But the only sound in Steven's ears was the bellow of his partner as it cocked back its leg, fist shining bright. Salamence's attack poured forth just as Metagross lunged. In an instant, the steel type was swallowed by flames, vanishing in a cloak of fire. Steven tensed, breath frozen in his throat. And then, the center of the flamethrower exploded in a brilliant fireball. Out from the flames shot Metagross, fist rocketing straight for Salamence's face. Steel met bone with a resounding crack. And then, silence fell. Standing over the mangled scales of Salamence's unconscious form was Metagross, its fist still dripping with the flame-retardant juice of its Aka berry. The crushed husk of the berry clattered to the ground as Metagross lowered its leg, splattered in sticky sweetness and swaths of charred, blackened hide where the juice didn't reach. Dumbfounded, Steven couldn't move. Jaw slack, he watched as the last symbol beneath the champion's name winked out. They had done it. They won. Metagross! His voice was barely a whisper. They won! He was nearly toppled to the ground as Metagross came barreling across the battlefield, burying its crest in his chest with a cry so fierce he felt his ribs rattle. Prying himself back from his starter's best approximation of a hug, he clung to the giant X that crossed Metagross's brow with shaking hands. We did it! We did it! Metagross, we did it! The laugh that escaped him nearly hurt. It had been buried so deep in nervousness and tension, it fairly ripped from his throat. But the giddiness wouldn't fade, and without knowing what else to do, Steven buried his head against Metagross's own, and let the sheer disbelief turn his next laugh into something that resembled a sob. Thank you, Metagross! Thank you! Puzzled at its trainer's odd outburst, Metagross rumbled a question, and Steven could only offer a sheepish grin in return. Finally relinquishing his death grip, Steven straightened and gave his partner an affectionate rub along its brow. You were brilliant! You all were brilliant! The Pokeballs at his hip rocked in response, and finally, the fluttering in his chest lowered to a level where he could concentrate on something other than taking one breath after the other. It was only then that he noticed Metagross's gaze had focused off to the side, and he turned to find Drake standing a few paces away. His face was impassive, and even though the battle was over, Steven still found himself swallowing nervously. The old sailor tipped his hat in a curt nod. "Return your partner, and follow me." Nodding, Steven obeyed, and picked his way across the ruined battlefield behind the champion. No, former champion. They crested the top of the stairs of the champion's platform, and paused at the set of double doors that stood sealed at the rear of the chamber. Drake spared a glance Steven's way before keying the portal open. The whoosh of the automatic doors was abrupt, and even though the passageway was only dimly lit, he dutifully followed Drake inside in silence. The chamber beyond was an eerie quiet as the pair walked, polished floors as pristine as the marble of the walls. Thankfully, the walk was a short one, and as Drake slowed to a stop, the lights of the room came on at full brightness, revealing the full splendor of the League's highest pedestal. "Welcome to the Hall of Fame, champion." Steven blinked. Was Drake smiling? "Place your Pokeballs in the 6 slots, and then place your trainer's card on the scanner." Drake motioned to the computer terminal that sat at the center of the room. 6 Pokeballs were placed alongside his ID, and the machine whirred to life. The screen above the terminal flicked on, and a digital image of Steven's team appeared on the display. He watched, wide-eyed, as his companions scrolled to their place on the screen, until a bright flash caught him by surprise, and he flinched. Drake chuckled at Steven's puzzled expression, and gestured for Steven to look back at the monitor. Staring back at him was the photo of a frazzled, silver-haired teenager that in no way could actually be him. Silent question on his lips, he turned to stare at Drake, who only huffed another laugh in response. "Don't worry, your official League photo will look a lot better." With a few keystrokes, Steven's photo vanished, and another photo took its place. He still wore the same captain's hat, but his mustache and sideburns only carried a hint of white. But the most remarkable coincidence was that Drake's photo bore the same starstruck expression as Steven's. Drake shrugged, swiftly keying away from both photos. "Guess it's tradition at this point to take a photo right after the victory. Now, let's get you settled in your temporary quarters. I'm sure you're exhausted. I know I was after my win." Steven blinked again. "Quarters? You may be the champion of record as of this moment, but we still have a lot of preparation to do before the League makes the official announcement. You'll be staying at Evergrande until then." A million questions flew through Steven's mind. Prepared once you became the champion? They never taught that in trainer school. But Drake was already headed back to the entrance of the hall, so Steven quickly gathered his team and jogged after the former champ. As the lights dimmed back down, Drake paused at the door to wait for him. In the light of the champion's chamber beyond, Steven caught the look of genuine respect on the old sailor's face. "Congratulations." Should you rise through the ranks and earn this prestigious distinction, be proud. It is a great honor to hold the highest title of the Pokemon League, and yet it is almost an even tougher task to hold on to that title once it is achieved.